Beyond the gates, spoilers tease that there is a tangle of appetites and ghosts sitting inside a suburban house, jealousy like a small animal that won't be shushed, memory as a third body in bed, the kind of private betrayals that are both obvious and invisible. In the warm light of their master bedroom, Bill lifts Hayley as if to prove a point, to close a distance that has been growing between them by inches for months. He carries her easily, a practiced motion from years of being close, and sets her down on the edge of the bed with a kiss that smells faintly of aftershave and coffee. For a few seconds the scene seems ordinary to people who have built a life negotiating the same complicated map of obligations and affection. Then the image fractures, his hands hesitate at the small of her back, his eyes take in the familiar curve of her shoulders and then look past them, like a man seeing a photograph whose subject somehow, impossibly moves. Hayley watches him in a way that is equal parts accusation and pleading. The thing that makes jealousy so corrosive is that it looks for proof and then invents it when it cannot be found. She has lived with Bill long enough to know the rhythms of his days, the calls, the clients, the predictable arguments about the dishwasher. She knows his smells and the way he folds his shirts. But there is an old calendar hung behind his glass shelf in the efficient artifact they both pretend not to notice, where dates from the past still bear the ghost of some other person's handwriting. Hayley has been paying attention to small things other people would miss. Caroline, Bill's office manager and an unwilling chronicler of schedules, has left a message this afternoon that read, bluntly, "Bill's meeting's pushed. Might be home late." Hayley saw the timestamp and the lie in his voice 5 minutes later. He says work. She hears something else. Bill believes, perhaps even zealously convinces himself, that he can contradict suspicion with an embodied demonstration. He carries Hayley up the short flight from the kitchen into the bedroom and sets to the familiar rituals as if the proof of intimacy will be its own erasure. He is earnest in the beginning. He wants to be convinced that the flame is still theirs alone. He thinks that the physical closeness will burn away the ghost he refuses to name. But his mind has been a room with a door left slightly ajar, and through that crack Danny's face keeps drifting in, a laugh, the tilt of a chin that used to deliver both apology and apology's opposite, seduction. The past with Danny is not a photograph for Bill, it is a film he keeps rerunning, edited in ways that never quite end. Hayley feels the distance. She notices how his hands search for her like someone searching for a page he has already read. She is not an idiot about desire. She knows when a body is attentive and when it is merely present. The intimacy becomes performance. Bill is there, but his presence is a kind of mimicry. He says his words the way one recites a script. He kisses where he always has, but his kisses do not land fully because his head, for all his attempts at discipline, has wandered back into the rooms where he and Danny once stood. He lies to her, then soft and convenient, "I've got to head to the office." It is a small, rehearsed lie, packaged in the social lubrication of obligation. But Hayley knows his rhythm too well. Caroline's text remains in the corner of her mind like an accusation. That evening becomes a study in small betrayals. Bill's excuse is plausible: a client, a last-minute revision, an invoice that must be signed. But the smoke of Ethish's nervousness, the way he rubs the base of his thumb against the inside of his wrist when he thinks no one is watching, tells another story. Hayley watches him catch his own reflection in the glass of the bedside lamp and sees shame flicker across a face that still wants to believe in self-mastery. When he pulls away abruptly, apologizes for the interruption, and promises to make it up, the promise lands like a coin thrown into a well. The surface ripples and then, for all that, signals nothing. The lie sits heavy between them. Hayley does not acquiesce quietly to being told that she is overreacting. Her anger is a practical thing. It sharpens her speech and makes her hands steady. She confronts him with an accusation that feels warmer for its familiarity. "You're still seeing her," she says, blunt and resolute. Bill's denial is vehement. He calls her paranoia. He calls his fidelity a given. He presses himself close, trying to replace words with gestures, trying to make physical reassurance stand in for emotional evidence. He picks her up, sets her on the bed again, and begins to make love as if to show her that the world he now inhabits is only the two of them. There is a desperation in his movement that Hayley misreads as proof. She wants to be convinced more than she wants to be right. What they do not voice aloud, what they cannot say, is that this is no longer only a dispute about present facts. It is a fight against memory's sovereignty. Bill has been keeping his past with Danny alive, not necessarily through physical meetings but through an idolatry of memory. He remembers Matchbox conversations, the way she used to read the paper at breakfast, the light on her cheek when she slept. Memory can be talismanic, sticky, protective, and small, but in his hands memory has become a giant, occupying the bed like another person. Even when his arms are around Hayley, he is bargaining with a ghost. The tragedy is not only that he still feels for Danny, it is that his attachment is largely a private theater, the kind where the leading actor refuses to let the present scene be anything but rehearsal. Hayley senses this in the infinitesimal ways he falters. She knows the exact moment his mind's tide recedes, the way his jaw tightens, the way he presses his tongue to the roof of his mouth as if tasting a word he cannot swallow. So she refuses complicity. She pulls back, not out of cruelty but as a detector of truth. If this is only performance for her benefit, she will not be a complicity in her own erasure. She is not a woman to be pacified by a carry-to-bed gesture. When she says, "I saw Caroline's text," Bill's denial curdles into irritation. He calls her ridiculous. But his irritation has the limpness of a man trying to grieve gracefully. His eyes, for a breathless moment after he speaks, do not meet hers. They go somewhere behind her shoulder as if searching for a voice that will not answer. The scene in the bedroom, briefly tender and then acrid, catalyzes Hayley. She decides not to be the woman who is politely reassured with cheap ceremony. Instead, she makes a calculation that people in bitter love affairs make all the time: go to the place where the imagined rival lives and confront them. The act is not elegant. It is the only way she knows how to feel like a woman who is doing something rather than simply feeling. She dresses quickly, the cold metal of the zipper like a countdown, and leaves precisely the way a person tries to be decisive, with violence to small, habitual indecisions. She grabs her keys, and the front door clicks behind her like closure. The evening air is thin, a breeze that smells of late roses and something metallic from the nearby road. Hayley drives not in a straight line but with that specific, guilty speed of the hunted who wants to feel the motion of her own agency. Danny lives only a few blocks away in a house that once belonged to older women who kept geraniums and never had loud parties. Now it has been sanded and painted. Danny has made it her little theater of aesthetic choices: stark curtains, a lamp with an exposed filament, a bookshelf punctured with art books, and a ceramic ashtray that declares a casual disregard to the world. When Hayley storms the front porch and pounds, the door opens not to a woman cowering under an accusation but to a figure in a silk slip who blinks like someone who has been lounging in private sun and finds the afternoon suddenly lit. Danny is cool from the first second. She does not hurry. She is almost luxuriant in how she processes Hayley's presence. She is wearing sleepwear that says she has time and no fear of the consequences of being seen that way. Her voice, when she speaks, is measured, as if she had rehearsed every possible tone. She smiles, then widens it to something more predatory. "Hayley," she says, the name coming like a toast. Danny knows how to puncture expectation with casualness. Where Hayley expects shock, Danny offers the exact opposite, a kind of bemused curiosity that makes the other woman look foolish. Hayley has imagined all the possible lines of defense. She thought perhaps Bill would be up there, angry and apologetic, or that Danny would be startled into shame. The truth is wilder. Danny begins to play. She knows so. She knows more than Hayley imagines about the wound she opens in Bill, and she is delighted by the power. Danny begins to lace her words with the salt of provocation. She says things that are half-truths, half seduction, and she does it for the effect of watching the color leave Hayley's face. She tells Hayley, with no malice but with an amused architecture of cruelty, that she and Bill had a history but that they are both free now, that such things are ordinary, that she and Andre, her new partner, have arrangements that keep the pressure of love at a tolerable hum. She confesses, not without glee, to having spoken frankly with Andre, they will see other people, if necessary, as long as they fulfill the domestic obligations that make stability possible. 3 times a week, she says, with an offhand, almost bureaucratic tone, is the rule we like. The line lands like an unexpected law. Hayley's body registers it not as information but as a dam break, the sense that a cherished exclusivity has been turned into a marketable commodity. Danny is not only taunting her, she is performing an ideological stance on modern love and open, economical, and oddly clinical sexuality that treats the heart like an HR department. Hayley is not equipped for ideological debates. She is equipped for being hurt. She sees in Danny's leanness and candor the reason Bill's mind has wandered. Danny is not simply a memory, she is a philosophy that promises permission to withdraw, that, far more than any physical rendezvous, makes her dangerous. What follows is pulverizing in its velocity. Hayley, wounded and incandescent, cannot keep herself from escalating. The scene at Danny's house becomes less of a conversation and more of a visceral collision. Words ricochet and fail. Danny's tone, maddeningly calm, is read by Hayley as deliberate provocation. There is a kind of deliberate cruelty to someone who knows they are loved by someone else and refuses to repair or give it back. Hayley's fingers flood with a heat that makes rationality step aside. She lashes out first with speech that turns to hysteria, then with a hand that becomes physical. In the breathless chaos of the moment, gestures that begin as shoves become something else. Danny staggers, gasps, then collapses to the floor with an awful economy. The apartment goes quiet like an echo chamber. Hayley's mind filters the next minutes into slow-motion film. She sees Danny, beautiful and still, the lamp casting an exact shadow across her cheek. She hears only her own breath for a long time, each inhale abusive in its presence. Everything else becomes a flurry of details, the dust motes in the sun, the ceramic ashtray glinting, the faint sound of a traffic light changing somewhere far away. The rational thing would be to call for help, to get someone else to take over, but the irrational instrument fear becomes the conductor. She checks Danny, touches her wrist, and finds it shockingly cool. Panic tears the fabric of thought into strips. Did she hit her head? Did she faint? Or worse, did the suddenness of the confrontation trigger something fatal? There is a scabbed, small memory that surfaces in this cliff-edge moment, the night of the divorce, years ago, when Danny had finally walked away and Bill had stood there like a man who had just had an organ uprooted. That night had left a tiny residue, the knowledge that some wounds do not bleed until they are reopened. Hayley thinks, in that instant, that she has opened a wound too wide. She cannot tell whether Danny's stillness is collapse or death. The moral arithmetic of the moment is black and white. If the worst is true, what becomes of her? If the worst is not true, how will she explain the violence that just unfurled, which Hayley had left open in the fury of her exit, is now closing with a soft click? Footsteps come like actors' marks in a play. Hayley turns to find the silhouette of a man in the doorway. Andre, Danny's partner, perhaps, or someone else entirely. Someone who moves with the blunt protective instinct of someone who knows that domestic peace can be fragile and that when it breaks, it does not always return in the same shape. The tension is a live wire. Hayley's chest tightens. There is a sense that everything has changed into a trap of moral clarity. The scene closes on the threshold of calamity, a woman on the ground, a woman standing in panic, and the arrival of a third figure whose presence promises consequences. She thinks of Bill Bennett as the man who had tried to make love, but as the man whose memory had been the spark. She imagines him walking into this tableau and seeing his past and present made into a tableau of violence. She pictures him being forced to choose between the timelines he has been splitting between what he remembers and what he has now. The thought is almost unbearable. The knowledge that private obsessions can produce public disasters. There is silence then, heavy as guilt. Hayley wants to call out, to tell the newcomer that it was an accident, that Danny will wake, that this will be a moment they can stitch back together. Instead she looks at her hands, at the tremor in her fingers. The house seems too small for the enormity of her own feelings. The story has tilted into a new register. No longer only about jealousy but about accountability. She has moved from voyeur to actor, from suspicion to action, and the action may have burned a life. That is where the first night ends, with the possibility of catastrophe breathing down the hallway, and with Hayley and Danny suspended in the worst kind of limbo, awake with panic, the other possibly beyond reach. No neat ending arrives. Instead there is only the echo of the door, the dimness of the lamp, and the thought of Bill's name like a summons. The scene hangs, unresolved, like a bad omen. The reader is left with a single, terrible question: did jealousy, in its most human and most destructive form, cross the line into something irreversible? It takes days for the world to collect itself after the phone calls begin. They come in waves, like aftershocks, an ambulance siren that cuts the dawn, a police knock that leaves a dull, stinging ring under the mind's skin, the muted, clinical tones of people asking for statements as if the human heart could be reduced to neat paragraphs. At the center of it all stands Bill, a man whose private life has become the subject of public curiosity. He arrives at Danny's door with inputs of rage and dread braided together, angry at the thought that Hayley's accusation might be true, dread at the possibility that it will be otherwise. He moves like someone who has been pulled into the middle of his own dream. Bill is a complicated animal. He is not heartless, he is a man who has been living with an ache and trying to anesthetize it with small, dutiful rituals. In the days after Danny is found unconscious, clumsy phrasing that hides a clinical truth, Bill's reactions are a study in equivocality. He visits the hospital not as a lover returned but as the man who remembers the old language of passion and tries to translate it into regret. In one moment he speaks with a steadiness that earns him the confidence of the nurses, in another he melts into a grief that is private and consuming. He does not, initially, arrive in chains of culpability. He arrives in a way only complicated men arrive, curious, half-ashamed, eager to fix things that may not be fixable. Hayley is charged, if not explicitly by law then certainly by conscience, with the act that has pushed everyone into the spotlight. She is questioned at length by officers who ask precise, cold questions, the kinds that hope to extract clarity from human fog. What happened? They ask. She tells them, and her answers bounce off the hard surfaces of authority and land in places that seem to accept them but are not finished with them. Her confession is not theatrical, it is stripped of the dramatic flourish of villains and instead lodged in the quieter terror of a woman who realizes how quickly a life can unspool. She is advised to seek counsel. She is told to say little. Meanwhile the neighborhood trembles with gossip, a low thrum of whisper and speculation that corrodes even the polite neighborliness they had curated. Danny, when she wakes in the hospital hours later, is what one might call stubbornly alive. The doctors talk about concussions and contusions and the miraculous resilience of a body that refuses to give up. The first thing she does upon waking is to search the room for any given standard of vindication, proof that she will be seen as a victim rather than a provocateur. She rehearses her complaint and her anger. She knows how to channel being wronged into an instrument of power. When Bill arrives, she takes the measure of him and finds him awkward, of course, but also flattened by the weight of what he has been watching, a life he helped build, now unmade by the hands he once trusted. The legal questions do not resolve themselves. Hayley is not immediately arrested. The situation is messy, because intent is hard to prove when moments rush like river stones. The police must sift evidence, the bruise pattern on Danny's temple, Hayley's fingerprints, the neighbors' statements, the timeline of calls and texts. Bill's phone becomes a small tomb of messages that can be misread. Caroline's earlier text is pulled up and discussed in the same voice that had once been used for petty administrative matters. In the meantime, the neighborhood divides itself into those who defend Hayley as a woman driven to an act of self-preservation and those who whisper that jealousy is no excuse for violence. The argument is old and impotent, like a roundabout where nothing moves. It is in the quiet time between the hospital visits and the questioning that the true unrest reveals itself. Bill, who had been mentally dividing himself between Danny and Hayley, finds that division untenable. His past with Danny is not merely about sex or passion, it is wrapped in a skein of memory that includes shame, mistakes, and bartering away of promises. Perhaps the most damning truth is that his feelings were not rooted in the present but were a mournful nostalgia for the self he had been with Danny. In one of their conversations in the sterile hospital lobby, he tells Hayley something that is less confession than admission. He had been trying, in a faint, cowardly way, to keep the past alive because it felt like proof that he had once mattered in a different, more intense way. Hayley hears this and feels both grief and a strange cold relief. The grief is the expected one, the knowledge that love, when turned into memory, can become an instrument of theft. The relief is smaller, quieter. If Bill's betrayal is intellectual rather than physical, then maybe there is a path back to something else. But the relief is not without cost. She is the woman who threw the first stone literally or note, and the aftermath is a landscape of shards. Danny, recovering, does not show the graciousness of someone who has been rescued or pardoned. Instead, she wields her survival like a blade honed for advantage. She is angry and she is aware of leverage. She speaks with a clarity that is both performative and precise. She will not, she says, let the narrative be read for her. She will write it as she likes. Her partnership with Andre becomes important background detail. An open marriage can be read in one of two ways, either as liberation or as moral bankruptcy. In court or gossip, the nuance will be swallowed whole, leaving only the gluttonous headlines. Andre, who had been consenting to a particular set of domestic arrangements with Danny, is both protective and pragmatic. He does not fetishize the purity of love, but he also knows when the staging of openness becomes a danger. He stands by Danny in public but is privately unsettled by the violence. For all his philosophical tolerance, there are limits. One does not expect chaos to be a permanent variable in the calculus of one's domestic stability. He speaks to Bill with a politeness that refuses to forgive, and to Hayley with a kind of cold pragmaticness that undermines any attempt at redemption. Against this human theater, legal processes begin to move. Statements are filed, people are subpoenaed. The narrative of the incident becomes a text to be annotated, corrected, and contested. Hayley's claim of accidental violence competes with Danny's memory of being struck in a moment of fury. Bill's role as either hero nor complete bystander complicates matters. Did he owe Hayley an intervention? Should he have been present at the time? These are the questions that, in their clarity, are damning. The moral fog thickens when new details tumble out. Texts between Bill and Danny from months ago showing flirtation. A voicemail from Bill's pocket that suggests he had, at the very least, been grieving in private. Caroline, whose mundane role had once been to order supplies and keep the calendar, finds herself thrust into a moral center. She is a witness to administrative detail and human drama alike, and when asked to produce schedules she has to confront the reality that the small lies and adjustments she helped make for Bill's comfort could be twisted into proof of involvement. The scale of consequences becomes grotesquely large when small, ordinary acts are scrutinized under the merciless light of accusation. Everything thins into an inquest of identity. Who is Bill? A man still in love with the ghost of his ex? Or a husband caught in a moment of truth? Who was Danny? A provocateur who sought the power of being remembered, or a survivor of someone else's violence? Who is Hayley? A wronged partner who lost control, or a perpetrator whose jealousy consumed her? Each person sees themselves in the light of their choices and the gaze of others. The neighborhood, and by extension the reader, is left to judge, but judgment is not a simple thing. People are messy and contradictory. And when law tries to pin down subjective motivations, it often misses the way humans hold multiple, inconsistent truths at once. For Hayley, the hours are a slow, corrosive lesson in the way consequences clothe themselves in official tones. She oscillates between defiance and a despair so deep it feels like a physical weight. There is also a softer rage, at herself for not being stronger, at Bill for loving less visibly than he remembered, at Danny for being a person who can come back and smile as if the world has been rearranged for her amusement. But anger is a poor tool for clarity. It makes the world into a caricature and the human figures in it into symbols. What the court, the gossip, and even the lovers will finally have to deal with is the human mess that comes from memory and desire intersecting with violence. The arc pushes toward resolution, of course, But resolution is not necessarily redemption. Legal outcomes will come, apologies may be uttered or withheld. What is harder is the slow work of understanding. When people who have hurt each other sit across from one another, the real labor is not in assigning blame but in asking what in their histories made such violence possible. That interrogation digs deeper than any police report and is the kind of excavation that takes place both in courtrooms and in the lonely hours after midnight, where the body is left to its own reckonings.